The story of water begins before us, long before human memory, long before the first civilizations stood along rivers or built ships to sail upon the sea. It begins in silence, in a world where only wind and stone and tide moved across the earth. To speak of the oceans is to speak of something eternal, something that carries both the memory of creation and the echo of time. Tonight, as you listen, allow yourself to drift with this story as though you too are carried by the tide. Let each word come slowly, softly, like waves brushing against the shore. Imagine the earth in its earliest days, when the oceans were only beginning to form. Volcanic fires still burned across the continents, and the air was thick with steam and ash. Into that raw atmosphere, rains began to fall, rains that lasted not for days or weeks, but for thousands upon thousands of years. They fell endlessly, filling the low places of the world, gathering into vast basins, seeping into the cracks of the land, until the surface of the earth shimmered with water. Those waters would become the first oceans, the first mirrors of the sky, and in their depths, the first whispers of life began. It is soothing to think of those ancient seas, not as violent or destructive, but as patient. The oceans have always been patient. Even when storms rage, even when waves break against stone, the sea continues, carrying its secrets in silence. For billions of years, it has watched, never rushing, never ceasing, simply flowing. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it now, the deep and endless rhythm of water moving, a rhythm older than breath. Life began here, in these oceans before us. Tiny, unseen creatures stirred in the currents. They were delicate, but together they shaped the future. They released oxygen into the air, changing the planet forever. The oceans became nurseries, great shelters of possibility. In their vastness, evolution unfolded like a slow dream. Creatures grew shells, fins, eyes, and the strength to swim. Some would rise to the shores, becoming ancestors of the beings that would one day walk the land. But always, life returned to the ocean. For the sea is both beginning and refuge. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine yourself floating in those primordial waters. There is no city, no time, no sound of human voice, only the gentle currents and the shimmer of light filtering from above. The world is young, yet already the oceans carry a wisdom that will never fade. The ancients who came long after us also sensed this wisdom. To them, the oceans were not merely water, but living entities, gods, and mysteries. In Mesopotamia, myth spoke of the great waters that existed before creation, endless and dark. In Egypt, the first hill rose from the primeval sea, bringing life to the land. In Greece, the ocean was a titan, boundless and eternal. These stories show how deeply humans felt the pull of the sea, only as a physical force, but as a symbol of beginnings, endings, and eternity. The oceans before us are the same oceans that remain today. Their shapes have changed, continents have shifted, currents have altered their paths, but the waters endure. Beneath them lie mountains taller than the Himalayas, canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, plains wider than any desert. Most of it remains unseen, hidden in darkness. Even now, with all our tools and technology, much of the ocean floor has never been touched or mapped. It waits quietly, holding secrets from ages past. Imagine those unseen depths. Picture vast plains of silt, silent and untouched. Imagine towering hydrothermal vents, where minerals rise like pillars from the earth, surrounded by strange creatures that glow with their own light. Picture ancient shipwrecks resting in silence, their wood long decayed, their metals slowly dissolving, yet still carrying whispers of the lives that once traveled above. The ocean keeps these memories close, preserving them in its endless embrace. When we look back at the history of our world, the oceans are always there, shaping the course of time. They guided the migrations of the earliest humans, carrying them on rafts and canoes across great distances. They provided food, water, and passage. They also stood as barriers, keeping peoples apart until the courage to cross them was found. Each wave carries both separation and connection. To listen to the ocean is to listen to time itself. Waves are not sudden. They are formed from winds that travel across miles, across days. Each swell carries the story of storms far away, blending past and present into one. The same is true of history. Every era leaves a trace, a ripple that touches the next. The oceans before us are not gone. They are within every drop of water, every tide, every storm that still moves across the surface today. Let us return again to the silence of the deep. Imagine sinking slowly, gently, as if gravity itself has softened. The light fades with each moment, blue becoming darker, until it disappears into blackness. In this deep ocean, pressure is immense, and yet life still exists. Creatures drift slowly, conserving energy. Some glow with pale light, like stars scattered in the dark. Others move with quiet grace, their forms unlike anything seen on land. In their stillness, there is calm. In their existence, there is resilience. These are the hidden guardians of a world beneath the world. As you rest, picture yourself carried along by a current that has moved for millions of years. It does not hurry, it does not end. It simply flows, circling the globe, connecting seas and oceans into one vast body of water. This current is older than civilizations, older than mountains, older even than many stars in the sky. To drift with it is to feel part of something infinite. The oceans before us remind us of continuity. Civilizations rise and fall, but the sea remains. Empires carve their names into stone, but waves wash them smooth. Ships sail with pride, yet one day rest quietly at the bottom. Even memory fades, but the ocean carries on. And in this persistence, there is comfort. The sea teaches us that change is not an ending, but part of the cycle. The tide always returns. The current always moves. The waves always rise again. So let us rest with this thought, that the oceans, vast and ancient, have always been with us and will always be. They hold the memory of the world before us, and they carry the dreams of the world still to come. As you listen, as you breathe, imagine that you too are part of that endless water.com, deep and eternal. The oceans before us were not only waters of life, but also waters of change. They shifted with the earth itself, carving coastlines, flooding valleys, retreating to reveal land. In their movements, they shaped the very face of the planet. When ice spread across continents, the seas receded, exposing bridges of land that allowed animals and people to cross from one world to another. When the ice melted, the waters returned, rising once again to claim the shores, swallowing forests and plains, leaving behind only memories and legends. Consider the Black Sea. Thousands of years ago, it was smaller, surrounded by fertile lands. Then, a great flood swept through, as waters from the Mediterranean burst across the land, filling the basin in a matter of days or weeks. For the people who lived there, it must have seemed as though the world itself was drowning. They carried those memories in stories of floods, stories that echoed later in the great myths of Gilgamesh and Noah, of deluges sent by gods, of waters that cleansed the earth. Here again, the ocean was not only water but meaning, carrying human experience forward as story. The ancients often turned to the sea when they wished to understand beginnings. In India, ancient hymns spoke of the cosmic ocean, infinite and timeless, from which creation arose. In Polynesian traditions, the sea was both ancestor and home, a space filled with spirits, both protective and dangerous. Across the world, people sensed that the ocean was not merely a part of life, but the source of it, an eternal companion. Imagine the first sailors, long before maps, long before compasses, long before the idea of a globe. They set out in simple boats, their eyes fixed on the horizon. At night, they looked to the stars, learning patterns, following constellations that moved slowly across the sky. The ocean must have seemed endless, a mirror of the heavens above, and yet they trusted it, learned from it, adapted to it. For them, the sea was not only a path but a teacher. Its winds showed them how to build sails. Its waves taught them rhythm and patience. Its vastness taught them humility. Now picture the Mediterranean thousands of years ago, a crossroads of water. Egypt, Greece, Phoenicia, and Rome all found their power not only on land but also in the sea. Ships carried grain, wine, and olive oil across its surface. Armies crossed it to wage wars. Scholars and ideas flowed with its currents, connecting worlds that might otherwise have remained apart. The sea was a thread, weaving together the fabric of ancient civilization. Yet for all its importance, it remained unpredictable, a force never fully tamed. Let us travel farther back, before human memory, into prehistory. The oceans were already alive with wonders that would seem almost mythical to us now. Imagine the Devonian seas, over 350 million years ago, when armored fish with jaws of bone swam in waters filled with corals and trilobites. Imagine the Jurassic oceans, where long-necked plesiosaurs glided gracefully and giant marine reptiles ruled the depths. Imagine the Cretaceous, when sharks as long as buses hunted prey in seas that stretched across continents. These were the oceans before us, carrying the weight of ages, hosting kingdoms of creatures now gone but remembered in stone. When fossils are uncovered on mountaintops, they remind us of the ocean's power. Once, those peaks were seafloors. Once, fish swam where now only snow and eagles dwell. The earth shifts, but the ocean leaves its trace, written in shells turned to stone, in ripple marks frozen into cliffs. In this way, the sea writes its history, not in ink, but in the very bones of the planet. And yet, for all the oceans have revealed, more remains hidden. The deep sea is still largely unknown. Its darkness is unbroken, its pressure immense. Submersibles have shown us glimpses of strange beings, creatures with glowing organs, translucent forms, or shapes that seem almost otherworldly. They are reminders that the oceans before us are also the oceans still with us, full of life that challenges our imagination. These beings exist quietly, without our gaze, carrying on patterns of existence older than human history. The ocean has always been both familiar and mysterious. To stand on a beach is to feel its presence in both ways. You can hear the waves, touch the water, smell the salt. It is close, tangible, but as you look out across the horizon, you see something without end, a vastness that defies comprehension. The ancients must have felt the same, and perhaps this is why they gave the sea a place in their myths. It was too immense to be ordinary, too eternal to be ignored. The Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, the Arctic, the southern names we use now, but truly they are one ocean, one body of water connected and unbroken. The ancients may not have known this in words, but they felt it in journeys, in currents, in the way storms in one place could be felt in another. The ocean is unity, a reminder that separations are often illusions, that what seems divided is in truth connected. As you rest, imagine this unity. Picture yourself floating not in one sea or another, but in the whole ocean of the world. Feel the water beneath you as vast and endless. Hear the gentle swell of waves moving far beyond sight. Allow yourself to drift with the sense that you are held by something greater than time, greater than distance, greater than change. The oceans before us whisper in many mythic, historical, poetic, but all of them are calm if you listen closely. They remind us not to hurry, not to cling, not to fear endings. For the sea teaches that everything flows, everything returns, everything continues. And so, the story drifts onward. The oceans before us become the oceans within us, their salt flowing in our blood, their rhythm in our breath, their mystery in our dreams. We carry them always, just as they carry the world. The oceans before us have always been guardians of memory, long before there were books, before there were stone tablets, before words were written. The waters already held the stories of the earth. They remember in silence, in layers of sediment that drift slowly down to the seabed, forming archives older than any library. In those layers are traces of plants, of animals, of climates long gone. Each grain of sand, each fragment of shell, each mineral settling gently into the dark, carries the story of a moment. Over millions of years, those moments accumulate into chronicles, the quiet diary of the ocean. Imagine, if you will, the floor of the deep sea. In that endless darkness, a fine snow falls continuously. It is not snow of ice, but snow of life, tiny remains of plankton, microscopic creatures, particles of dust, carried on winds across continents, drifting down slowly, steadily, endlessly. This is the snow of ages, the snow that preserves the pulse of the planet. Scientists who study these sediments find in them a record of climate, of shifting atmospheres, of the rise and fall of species. The oceans before us, it seems, are also the keepers of time itself. But the oceans do not only keep memory in silence, they keep it in sound as well. For if you listen closely, the ocean speaks. Waves crash against cliffs, echoing the slow erosion of stone. Tides pull across shores, whispering in rhythm with the moon. Whales call across vast distances, their voices traveling farther than any human shout could reach. These sounds belong not to one place, but to the entire body of the sea. They remind us that even in stillness, the ocean is never silent. It is always breathing, always moving, always alive. In the ancient world, people often described the ocean as a living being. They spoke of it as a mother, as a father, as a god. In Greece, the sea was Poseidon, powerful and moody, a force of storms and calm alike. In the Pacific Islands, the ocean was an ancestor, one who provided food, guided travel, and demanded respect. In Norse tales, the sea was the realm of Jarmungandr, the great serpent that encircled the world. Everywhere, the ocean was more than water. It was presence, personality, power. Think of the sailors who crossed these waters centuries ago. Imagine standing on the deck of a wooden ship, the horizon stretching endlessly in all directions. Days pass, weeks pass, with nothing but water and sky. The wind carries you forward, but you cannot see land. In those moments, the ocean must have seemed eternal, limitless, beyond comprehension. Some feared it, calling it a void. Others revered it, calling it a path. All who crossed it knew it was never to be taken lightly. And yet, the ocean also nourished. It gave fish to eat, salt to preserve, routes for trade, and ways to connect distant peoples. The Phoenicians built their lives on it, traveling from port to port, spreading language, goods, and knowledge. The Vikings braved it in longships, steering by sun and star, reaching shores they had never seen. The Polynesians navigated it without maps, reading the swells of the waves, the colors of the water, the flights of birds, and finding islands scattered across thousands of miles. For them, the ocean was not emptiness, but a web of life, a highway of connection. But even as it connected, it separated. Oceans marked boundaries between worlds. For centuries, continents remained unknown to one another, isolated by the sheer breadth of the seas. The waters kept secrets, holding lands beyond the horizon out of sight. To those who dreamed of what lay beyond, the ocean was a mystery, sometimes inviting, sometimes forbidding. Let us return again to deeper time, far before humans ever touched the sea. The oceans before us were already sculpting life. In their waters, the first cells grew. In their depths, the first multicellular beings took shape. Creatures learned to swim, to crawl, to breathe. The ocean was the first garden, the first cradle, the first teacher of survival. When life finally ventured onto land, it carried the memory of the sea within its body. Even now, in our blood, there is salt, echoing the waters from which all life came. Picture the Cambrian seas, over 500 million years ago. Strange creatures moved through them, trilobites with armored shells, soft-bodied beings with multiple eyes, predators with grasping limbs. These oceans were alien, yet they are part of our ancestry. Each wave carried the experiments of evolution. Each tide brought forth new possibilities. In those waters, life learned resilience, learned to adapt, learned to grow. The oceans before us were the first canvas of creation. And then, across the vastness of time, the seas continued to change. Continents drifted, pulled by forces deep within the earth. Oceans opened, closed, expanded, and disappeared. The Tethys Sea once stretched across lands that are now mountains. The Panthalassic Ocean once surrounded the single supercontinent of Pangaea. Imagine one great ocean, encircling all land, touching every shore. Its waves would have carried storms across the globe, its depths filled with creatures now lost to memory. It is strange to think that even the seas themselves are not eternal, that they too are shaped and reshaped by the turning of the earth. Even today, the ocean is not fixed. Its currents shift with climate, its levels rise and fall with ice, its chemistry changes with the breath of the planet. The oceans before us remind us that nothing is still, that change is the one constant, and that in change there is always renewal. As you rest, you may feel this flow within yourself. Your breath rises and falls like the tide. Your heart beats in rhythm with the waves. You are not separate from the ocean, you are part of it. The same water that moves through the sea has moved through clouds, through rivers, through rain, and through you. The cycle is endless, seamless, eternal. And so, the oceans before us are not only in the past, they are in the present. They are within us. They are around us. They remind us of continuity, of connection, of the gentle truth that all things are part of one vast, flowing whole. The oceans before us have always been keepers of hidden landscapes. Beneath their shifting waves lies a geography as vast, as dramatic, and as ancient as the continents above. If one could lower the seas, if one could drain away the water as one drains a basin, a new world would emerge. Mountain ranges taller than the Himalayas, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, plains wider than any desert. Yet all of it rests in silence, cloaked by the veil of water, unseen by most who have ever lived. Imagine the mid-ocean ridges, great chains of mountains stretching for more than 40,000 miles across the globe. They are the spine of the earth, born from molten rock, rising through fissures in the seafloor. At these ridges, the planet renews itself, pushing land apart, creating new crust, reshaping the map of the oceans. Around them, in the deep dark, vents release heat and minerals, forming towers that shimmer like chimneys, some taller than houses. From these vents, life thrives without sunlight, feeding not on the energy of the sun but on the chemistry of the earth itself. These communities of strange creatures, giant tubeworms, blind shrimp, luminous bacteria, remind us that the ocean holds not just the memory of life's beginning, but also new beginnings, new experiments, new paths of survival. Beyond the ridges lie the abyssal plains. They stretch in stillness, flat and seemingly featureless, yet they are not empty. Here, a soft layer of sediment accumulates over eons, creating landscapes of delicate slopes and hidden contours. Tiny creatures burrow into the mud, starfish crawl slowly across the surface, faint trails mark the movement of unseen lives. In this stillness, time seems to lose its urgency. Processes unfold over thousands, even millions of years. The abyss reminds us of patience, of quiet persistence, of the beauty of slowness. And then, there are the trenches. They are the deepest scars on the earth, places where one plate of the planet slips beneath another, diving into the mantle below. The Mariana Trench, the deepest of them all, reaches more than 36,000 feet into the earth, deeper than Everest is tall. To descend there is to leave the realm of light entirely, to enter pressure so immense that metal bends and bone would shatter. Yet even here, life endures. Tiny amphipods, translucent and fragile, drift through the darkness. Microbes thrive within the sediments. Even in the greatest depth, the ocean is never empty. The ancient peoples who looked upon the sea could not see these hidden landscapes, but they sensed their mystery. To them, the deep was a realm of gods, of spirits, of monsters. The Greeks spoke of chasms beneath the sea, dark realms connected to the underworld. In Polynesian stories, deep trenches were places where spirits moved between worlds. In Japan, myths told of Raijay, the palace of the Dragon King, lying beneath the sea, jeweled and radiant, unreachable to ordinary humans. In these tales, the unseen depths became spaces of imagination, where the boundaries between the known and the unknown dissolved. And as the oceans held mysteries below, they also held stories above. The surface of the sea was a mirror, reflecting sky, weather, and stars. Sailors learned to read it as one reads a book. The color of the water, the shape of the waves, the direction of the swells, these were clues, signs, guides. To a skilled navigator, the sea was not a blank expanse. It was a text, a map written in motion. The Polynesians, in particular, carried this wisdom, steering across vast distances without compass or sextant, guided by the whispers of the ocean itself. To sail by starlight across a horizonless sea required not only knowledge, but also deep trust in the patterns of nature, trust in the rhythm of the waters, trust that the ocean would reveal the way. On the ancient Mediterranean, mariners traced the coastlines, never straying too far from land. To them, the open sea was both possibility and peril. The Phoenicians ventured farther, building networks of trade that carried them from port to port, spreading not only goods but also ideas, languages, and traditions. The sea, in this sense, was the first great highway of human exchange. It linked distant cultures, allowing them to influence one another, to grow together, even while separated by miles of water. Yet for all its role as a bridge, the ocean was also a wall. For centuries, entire continents remained hidden from one another, not because they did not exist, but because the waters kept them apart. It is strange to think how much of human history was shaped not by what was known, but by what was still beyond the horizon. The oceans before us were both giver and withholder, offering connection and preserving mystery in equal measure. As time unfolded, the sea-shaped empires, Rome secured its power in part through its control of the Mediterranean, which it called Mare Nostrum, our sea. The Vikings carved paths of conquest and trade across the North Atlantic, their longships cutting swiftly through cold waters. The Chinese fleets of the Ming dynasty sailed grand voyages, reaching coasts as far as Africa, spreading knowledge and wealth. Everywhere, those who mastered the waters found themselves able to expand influence, to exchange, to thrive. But the sea also humbled those who took it for granted. Storms rose suddenly, scattering fleets, breaking ships, swallowing entire journeys. Legends grew from these losses, tales of ghost ships adrift in mist, of sailors lost to sirens' songs, of kingdoms beneath the waves. These myths were not merely imagination, but reflections of respect, reminders of the ocean's power and mystery. As you rest now, imagine the ocean not as a distant thing, but as something alive within your own breath. The rise and fall of your chest is like the tide. The rhythm of your heartbeat is like the surf. Each exhale carries away the weight of the day, as waves carry sand from the shore. Each inhale draws in calm, as the sea draws in the sky. You are part of the same cycle, the same flow, the same eternal rhythm. The oceans before us remind us that even in their vastness, even in their mystery, they are not separate from us. They are the waters from which we came, the waters that still nourish, the waters that still shape the world quietly, patiently, endlessly. The ocean is not only the keeper of landscapes and highways of trade, it is also the keeper of stories. Across every shore, in every age, people have gazed upon the horizon and wondered what lay beyond. From those wonders arose myths, tales carried by the sound of waves, passed down from elders to children, from storytellers to listeners, across the generations. These myths, though different in language and detail, share a common thread: the ocean as a realm of mystery, power, and transformation. Consider the ancient Greeks, whose world was wrapped by the Mediterranean. They imagined gods who lived within the sea. Poseidon, with his trident, ruled the waters, stirring them to storm or calming them to peace. His moods were the moods of the sea itself. Sailors prayed to him before setting out, offering sacrifices, hoping for a safe return. Around him swam creatures of wonder, nereids, sirens, sea monsters, large enough to swallow ships whole. The ocean became, in their imagination, a stage upon which the drama of gods and men unfolded. Far across the world. In Polynesia, another vision of the sea took shape. To the island peoples, the ocean was not only vast and dangerous, but also the very thread of connection that bound them to each other. It was a path, not a barrier. They believed in Tangaroa, the god of the sea, who gave them fish and sustained their voyages. The stars above and the swells beneath were guides, and the ocean itself was alive with spirit. In their chants and songs, the sea was family, both friend and challenger, a place of lessons and tests, a source of life and wisdom. In the ancient Near East, myths spoke of the sea as chaos. In Mesopotamian stories, Tiamat, the great serpent of the primordial waters, embodied disorder, and it was through her defeat that creation began. To these cultures, the sea symbolized the wild and untamed forces of the universe, forces that had to be subdued before order could emerge. To gaze at the waves was to gaze at the edge of the unknown, at the place where chaos pressed against the fragile boundary of the human world. For the Norse, the sea was Jarmungandr, the world serpent, encircling all lands in an endless coil. It was feared that when the serpent rose from the waters, the end of the world would come. Yet even in this dark vision, there was a recognition of the sea's eternity, of its role in holding the world together. The ocean was not only danger, it was also destiny, woven into the fate of gods and men alike. And in India, the ocean was the stage for one of the great cosmic events, the churning of the ocean of milk. Gods and demons together used a mountain as a churning stick and a serpent as a rope, stirring the sea until treasures arose, jewels, divine beings, and even the nectar of immortality. Here, the ocean was a place of creation and renewal, a boundless reservoir from which life's gifts could be drawn. All of these stories, though born in different places, reflect a deep truth about human experience. The sea has always been larger than us, unpredictable and unyielding. And so we gave it faces, names, voices. We spoke of gods and serpents, of palaces beneath the waves, of treasures hidden in its depths. In doing so, we made the ocean something we could speak about, something we could live with, even if we could never control it. Yet myths were not only about fear or wonder, they were also guides. To say that a storm was Poseidon's anger was not only poetry, but also a way of remembering the sea's power, a way of respecting its dangers. To tell of the Polynesian god Tangaroa was to teach reverence for the waters that gave fish and sustenance. To recall the churning of the ocean of milk was to remind listeners that from struggle and patience come rewards. These myths, in their beauty, carried wisdom about how to live with the ocean, how to see it not only as enemy or obstacle, but as partner, teacher, and mystery. And beyond the myths, there were memories. Many cultures told of floods, great inundations that swallowed lands and forced migrations. Some of these stories may reflect real events: glacial lakes bursting, sea levels rising, coasts sinking. Over time, memory became legend, legend became myth. Yet within them may linger echoes of truths long past. The oceans before us have always shifted, and humanity has always adapted. Remembering those changes in stories, as you listen, you might picture yourself resting on a quiet shore at twilight, hearing these tales as the surf rolls gently in. Each wave carries the sound of voices from long ago. Each wave is like a storyteller, weaving together history and myth, fact and dream. The ocean itself becomes the narrator, speaking through its rhythms, whispering its secrets to those who will listen. Let yourself drift now with those waves. Let the stories surround you like a soft tide. There is no need to grasp them, no need to hold tight. They are not puzzles to solve, but music to hear, flowing and returning, again and again, just as the ocean does. That the oceans before us were not silent. They have always spoken, and humanity, in turn, has always listened, shaping myths and memories in response. In those myths, we see not only the sea itself, but also our reflection within it, our fears, our hopes, our imagination stretching toward the unknown. When we turn from the myths of the sea to the histories it has shaped, we begin to see how deeply human life has always been tied to water. Civilizations did not simply live beside rivers, lakes, and oceans. They were molded by them, nourished by them, and carried forward by their currents. To understand the story of the oceans before us is also to understand the story of ourselves. In Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates flowed, the rivers linked villages into cities, and cities into kingdoms. The seas beyond the Persian Gulf and wider Indian Ocean opened routes to lands far away. Clay tablets from those early cultures speak of ships filled with timber, copper, and lapis lazuli arriving from distant shores. Trade was more than exchange of goods. It was the movement of ideas, of symbols, of ways of life. Each time a ship docked, a fragment of another culture entered, and something of the local culture left with it, carried across the water to another shore. In Egypt, the Nile was a lifeline, its rhythm of flood and retreat, guiding the rhythm of planting and harvest. Yet beyond the Nile, Egyptians also looked to the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Their ships reached as far as Lebanon for cedar wood, sailed to Punt Perhaps in East Africa for incense and exotic animals, and ventured across channels that seemed immense to the ships of their time. The sea gave them connection, expansion, and stories to tell in hieroglyphs upon temple walls. The Greeks built their world upon the sea, scattered as they were across islands and rugged coasts. To them, the Mediterranean was not a barrier but a bridge. Their city-states rose and fell, but their ships kept moving, carrying olive oil, wine, pottery, and philosophy. In the harbors of Ionia, in the markets of Athens, in the colonies of Sicily and southern Italy, the sea's role as unifier is clear. What we call Greek civilization was, in truth, a tapestry woven across the waves. The Phoenicians, master sailors of the Levant, carried this even further. From their ports in Tyre and Sidon, their ships ranged across the Mediterranean, reaching North Africa, Spain, and perhaps even the Atlantic. They spread an alphabet that would, in time, evolve into the scripts we use today. The ocean was their road, their classroom, their messenger. Without the sea, their legacy would have been confined. With it, their influence spread across continents. Across the Indian Ocean, other stories unfolded. For thousands of years, monsoon winds guided ships between Arabia, India, and East Africa. These seasonal winds were steady, predictable, a kind of calendar written in the sky and the sea. With them came spices, silk, ivory, and gold. But more than goods, there came languages, faiths, and cultures. Islam spread along these coasts by ship. Buddhism traveled across the Bay of Bengal. Hindu influence shaped Southeast Asia. The ocean here was a teacher of rhythm, reminding its travelers that patience and timing mattered as much as strength. But to the east, the Pacific Ocean cradled the vast voyages of the Polynesians. Their double-hulled canoes, carved from trees and lashed with rope, carried them farther than any ancient people dared. From island to island, across thousands of miles, they moved with courage. Guided by stars, by swell patterns, by the flight of birds, they reached Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island, connecting a triangle of the Pacific, larger than any empire on land. For them, the ocean was not only the medium of travel, but also the heart of culture. Every chant, every carving, every ritual carried echoes of the sea. Even in the Atlantic, long before Columbus, coastal peoples sensed the sea's possibilities. The The Celts of Western Europe sailed their small boats to trade tin and amber. Fishermen ventured into open waters, following shoals of herring and cod. Though their ships were humble, their reliance on the sea was immense. To them, the ocean was the edge of the world, but also the place where food, wealth, and mystery came together. Each civilization saw the ocean in its own way. To some, it was a path, to others, a shield. To some, it was a giver of life, to others, a taker. But in every case, it was central. Without the ocean, human history would be fragmented, isolated, still locked in separate valleys. With the ocean, the world began to knit itself together. Slowly, subtly, wave by wave, tide by tide. As you listen now, let the stories drift like boats across your thoughts. Imagine the sails swelling with wind, the wooden hulls creaking as they move across the water. Hear the splash of oars, the cries of gulls, the steady hush of the sea. These sounds are ancient. They belong to centuries long past, yet they still echo in the ports and coasts of today. They are sounds of connection, of exchange, of humanity reaching outward across the waves. The oceans before us remind us that history is not written only on land. It is also written in the wake of ships, in the routes that linked shore to shore, in the songs sung by sailors as they steered by the stars. It is written in the tides, carrying not just salt and foam, but memory. Memory of all who have looked at the sea and seen both mystery and possibility. As time unfolded and centuries turned, the oceans that once carried small wooden boats and cautious coastal journeys began to carry something greater ambition. Civilizations grew, cities rose in power, and with them came the desire to expand, to explore, to discover what lay beyond the horizon. The seas, once feared as boundaries, became opportunities. They became stages upon which new chapters of human history would be written. In the Mediterranean, Rome rose as a force unlike any before it. The Romans called their sea mare Nostrum, our sea. It was not just a phrase of pride, but a reflection of their control. From Spain to Syria, from North Africa to Greece, their fleets moved swiftly across the waters, carrying soldiers, merchants, and messages. The sea allowed them to govern an empire too vast to survive without connection. Grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, marble from Greece all flowed across Roman waters. Yet just as important as goods were ideas. Roman law, language, and culture spread along these sea routes, knitting together diverse peoples under a single empire. Farther east, the Indian Ocean remained alive with its monsoon trade. By this time, Arab sailors had become its masters. They built sturdy dhows, their triangular sails catching the seasonal winds with precision. From the ports of Arabia and the Swahili coast, they sailed to India, to the islands of Southeast Asia, even to China. They carried not only spices and textiles, but also mathematics, astronomy, and stories from the Quran. In return, they brought home silks, ceramics, and philosophies that would influence their societies for centuries. The Indian Ocean was not the possession of any one empire, but a shared highway of exchange, connecting cultures from Africa to Asia in a network as intricate as any web spun by nature. Meanwhile, across the wide Pacific, the great Polynesian voyages continued. Even as empires rose elsewhere, these navigators kept alive a knowledge of the sea unmatched in its subtlety. They read the flight of birds at dawn, the color of swells reflecting distant islands, the faint glow of stars just before the horizon lightened. Their canoes stitched together an ocean larger than all continents combined, proving that the human spirit, when guided by patience and trust in nature, could cross even the widest seas. And in the north, the Vikings took to the waters with their sleek longships. They sailed across the North Atlantic, raiding and trading, but also exploring. Their ships carried them to the British Isles, to Iceland, to Greenland, and even to the shores of North America. Though their settlements there did not last, the memory of their voyages lingers. The Atlantic, once thought impassable, had been crossed, and though centuries would pass before it was crossed again in such a way, the possibility was now inscribed in human memory. That as maps grew more detailed, the oceans began to shift in human imagination. They were no longer endless voids, but measurable, chartable. The Arab geographer Al-Idrisi drew maps that placed seas at the center of connection. Chinese records spoke of great treasure fleets under Admiral Zhang He, ships so vast they carried whole gardens and entire communities across the waves. These fleets reached as far as Africa, bearing porcelain, silk, and gifts for foreign rulers. They were demonstrations of power, but also of curiosity voyages to see, to learn, to make contact. Yet even as knowledge grew, mystery lingered. Mariners told of sea serpents stretching longer than ships, of islands that appeared and vanished, of whirlpools that swallowed vessels whole. These tales, passed along with cargo and letters, remind us that the ocean was never just geography. It was imagination's canvas, an expanse upon which wonder was projected. For every precise map, there were margins filled with dragons and warnings of here be monsters. The sea invited both science and story, precision and dream. And still, the ocean humbled. Storms struck with little warning, reducing proud fleets to splinters. Empires that relied too heavily on the sea could falter when they forgot its unpredictability. The Spanish Armada, centuries later, would be scattered not only by English resistance but also by the fury of storms. The lesson was clear: mastery of the ocean was never permanent. Control was always provisional, granted only as long as nature allowed. As you rest now, imagine the ships of this era, their sails stretched wide against the wind, their wooden hulls creaking as waves lift and lower them, their crews gazing at stars for guidance. Picture lanterns glowing faintly on decks at night, casting circles of warmth upon the dark expanse of the sea. Within those circles, men whispered prayers, told stories, shared fears and hopes. Around them stretched silence, broken only by the hush of waves. It is a sound timeless and unchanging, the same sound you might hear now if you stood upon a quiet shore. The oceans before us shaped not only the fates of empires, but also the inner lives of those who sailed them. For every king who claimed dominion over the waters, there were countless sailors whose daily reality was the sway of the deck, the salt in the air, the ceaseless motion of the sea. Their experiences, though rarely recorded, remind us that history is not only grand, but also intimate. It is written in the small moments of endurance, in the patience of those who simply kept the ships moving forward. And so, the oceans continued to shape humanity. Wave by wave, tide by tide, they taught humility to those who sought power. They offered pathways to those who sought exchange. They carried not only ships but entire civilizations upon their shoulders, binding together the world in ways that could not yet be fully seen. The oceans, vast and endless, had long carried the weight of dreams. They had borne the trade of empires, the migrations of peoples, and the stories of those who braved their depths. Yet now, as centuries gave way to the dawn of a new age, the oceans were about to change once more. They would no longer be boundaries or regional passageways. They would become global highways, and the human story would expand to its farthest edges. The 15th and 16th centuries brought winds of curiosity and ambition. The age of exploration had begun. In Portugal, sailors watched the horizon with determination, convinced that the sea could reveal routes faster than any land. Prince Henry, remembered as the navigator, sponsored voyages that pushed farther along the coast of Africa, mapping shores, finding currents, and listening to the wisdom of those who lived by the sea. Slowly, step by cautious step, the Atlantic revealed its secrets. Portuguese ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope, a place once thought impassable, where two oceans meet in restless waves. With this passage open, the Indian Ocean, long a world unto itself, became linked to Europe. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, spices that had traveled slowly along caravan routes, could now flow by sea. The oceans had connected continents in ways never before possible. And then came a voyage that reshaped history. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed westward, believing Asia could be reached across the Atlantic. Instead, he encountered lands unknown to his world-vast continents, already home to countless peoples and cultures. Though he did not know it, the oceans had opened not just a route to Asia, but an entire hemisphere of new connections, conflicts, and changes that would forever alter the planet. In the years that followed, explorers ventured farther. Ferdinand Magellan's fleet circled the globe, proving for the first time that all seas were one, that every ocean was part of a single interconnected body of water. Though Magellan himself did not survive the journey, his expedition revealed the earth in its fullness. The oceans were no longer seen as separate mysteries, but as threads in a single tapestry, uniting every shore. The Atlantic became a stage of exchange unlike any before. Ships carried crops, animals, and people across its waters. Maize, potatoes, and tomatoes journeyed from the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia, reshaping diets and economies. Horses, wheat, and sugar traveled westward, altering landscapes and ways of life in the Americas. Yet, alongside these exchanges came darker currents, the forced movement of millions of enslaved Africans, torn from their homelands and carried across the Middle Passage in unbearable conditions. The Atlantic, full of promise for some, became a sea of sorrow for many others. And yet, even within this difficult history, the oceans remained what they had always been: silent witnesses, carrying ships across their surfaces, absorbing stories both joyful and tragic. They reflected not judgment, but endurance. Their waves continued to rise and fall, just as they had when the first canoes touched their shores. Elsewhere, great empires launched fleets that dazzled the imagination. Spain and Portugal drew lines across maps, claiming oceans as if they could be owned. Dutch and English merchants sent their ships eastward, forming companies that grew into global powers. The sea was no longer just a natural expanse, had become part of politics, economy, and identity. But for the sailors, for the men who climbed, rigging and steered by starlight, life at sea remained both harsh and beautiful. Days were filled with work, sails trimmed and ropes pulled. Nights brought stillness, when the sky above glittered with stars brighter than could ever be seen on land. They looked upward, navigating by constellations, the same ones their ancestors had traced for millennia. The ocean, even in the age of empire and conquest, still demanded humility, patience, and trust. And so, the age of exploration unfolded like a tide. It carried with it discovery, exchange, and expansion, but also conflict, exploitation, and loss. The oceans were both pathways of hope and corridors of grief. They reminded humanity that no journey is without complexity, that no horizon comes without shadows. As you drift in thought, imagine one of these great ships crossing the open sea. Its sails billow with wind, its hull creaks with the weight of cargo, and its lanterns glow faintly against the dark. The ocean stretches in every direction, endless and unbroken, its surface shifting with silver light beneath the moon. For the sailors, every sound, the splash of waves, the groan of wood, the distant cry of seabirds, was both familiar and eternal. It was the language of the sea, the same language heard by Phoenician traders, Polynesian voyagers, and Viking explorers. It was a voice beyond time. And though the world had grown wider, though maps were being filled with coastlines and currents, mystery remained. For every landfall, there were still uncharted waters. For every new connection, there were still questions left unanswered. The oceans, vast and unknowable, would always hold secrets, even as humanity reached farther across them. The oceans, eternal in their rhythm, did not pause as the centuries passed. Waves rose and fell, tides pulled and released, and currents circled the globe in their steady, invisible pathways. Humanity, however, was changing. As the great age of discovery expanded into empires, and as empires deepened into networks of trade and conflict, the seas became both lifelines and battlefields. Yet beneath all this, the sea itself remained as it had always been: a mirror of time, a reminder of continuity, and a keeper of mysteries that no empire could ever claim. By the 17th century, the oceans had become crowded with sails. Ships of Spain, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands moved across the waters like wandering cities, their masts reaching skyward like forests of wood and rope. The seas that once seemed immeasurable now had established routes, familiar winds, and known dangers. Maps filled with coastlines and markers of reefs, though never fully complete, gave sailors a sense of mastery. But mastery of the ocean was always an illusion, for even as men drew lines and borders, the sea followed only its own laws. The Atlantic Ocean, so recently a place of tentative crossings, now pulsed with constant movement. The triangular trade became a cycle of terrible regularity: manufactured goods from Europe to Africa, enslaved lives from Africa to the Americas, and crops from the Americas back to Europe. The sea carried these ships ceaselessly, indifferent to the pain, suffering, and loss hidden in the holds. For those forced across, the ocean was not a highway but a prison, an unending horizon that separated them from home forever. The silence of the waves masked cries that history still struggles to echo back in full. And yet, on those same seas, other voyages unfolded: journeys of migration, of discovery, of hope for those who sought new lives on distant shores. In the Indian Ocean, too, the tides of history shifted. For centuries, it had been a web of trader dhows carrying spices, Chinese junks sailing to faraway markets, and Indian merchants navigating monsoons with practiced ease. Now, European fleets entered, bringing with them cannons, garrisons, and fortresses built on the coasts. The ocean, once an open exchange of cultures, became a contested zone of power. Still, beneath the hulls of these new ships, the waters moved as they had for millennia, flowing between Madagascar and Gujarat, between Zanzibar and Malacca, whispering the same timeless songs. The Pacific, vast beyond comprehension, began to open to the world's gaze. Spanish galleons traced long arcs between Manila and Acapulco, carrying silver westward and spices eastward. The journey was brutal months of silence, where the horizon never changed, and provisions dwindled with each passing day. Yet the galleons persisted, for the riches of trade demanded endurance. To the sailors aboard, the Pacific seemed endless, its calm stretches deceptive, its storms sudden and fierce. But within its immensity lived countless islands, each with people who had long known the ocean as home. Polynesian navigators, skilled in ways the Europeans could scarcely imagine, had crossed those waters centuries earlier, guided not by compasses or charts, but by the stars, the waves, and the flight of birds. Their knowledge was different, but no less vast. Meanwhile, in the icy north, explorers pressed into the unknown. They searched for passages that might shorten journeys between oceans, hoping to find routes through the Arctic. Ships became trapped in ice, crews vanished into the frozen silence, and the sea held their fate secret beneath sheets of white. These expeditions remind us that the ocean, though charted, remained dangerous. Its mystery is never fully conquered. The sea gave passage when it wished, and it withheld when it chose. And as humanity spread its sails across the world, another transformation was taking place. Science began to turn its gaze toward the sea, not just as a highway or battlefield, but as a subject of wonder and inquiry. The Enlightenment era encouraged observation, measurement, and recording. Sailors began to keep logs of currents, tides, and winds, building a knowledge that belonged not just to one voyage, but to generations. Instruments improved, telescopes and compasses refined the art of navigation, and slowly, the sea yielded its patterns to those who studied patiently. Yet the ocean was not only studied with tools, it was still experienced with awe. Writers and poets spoke of its immensity, artists painted its moods, and musicians tried to capture its rhythms in song. The sea became more than a place, became a symbol, a metaphor for both freedom and danger, for both mystery and knowledge. And as humanity leaned closer to reason, the sea remained a reminder that not everything could be measured, not every depth reached. The 18th century unfolded with revolutions on land, but the sea continued to weave them together. Ships carried ideas as much as goods. Pamphlets, letters, and whispers of change crossed oceans, fueling new beginnings. The American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and later the independence of nations in South America were all linked to the seas that brought voices and supplies across distances. The waters were not only witnesses of commerce, they were silent partners in transformation. But it was also in these centuries that whaling voyages began to expand, sending ships deep into the Atlantic and Pacific in search of giants of the sea. Whales, hunted for oil, became part of the global economy, and their migrations became pathways for human movement as well. Men in small boats, dwarfed by the immensity of the animals they sought, tested their courage against beings that had lived in the oceans for millions of years. To hear the blow of a whale, to see its vast back arch above the surface, was to glimpse another world within the world, one that humans had only begun to touch. And through it all, the oceans endured. They shifted with storms, they carried fleets both grand and humble, they reflected the sun in dazzling brightness, and the moon in gentle silver. They remained what they had always been, mysteries, both familiar and distant. Each generation of sailors, merchants, migrants, and explorers saw the oceans anew. Yet each also recognized something eternal in them. As you let these images drift in your mind, imagine the steady rocking of a ship, the creak of wood, the gentle splash of water against the hull. Imagine a horizon that stretches without end, the line between sky and sea blurring into quiet infinity. For the sailors of centuries past, this was both a comfort and a challenge. It was the same horizon seen by the first canoes, the same vastness gazed upon by the first who ever dreamed of what lay beyond. The oceans, before us and beyond us, hold this continuity. They are both past and present, both memory and mystery. And as history moves forward, as technology changes and nations rise and fall, the seas remain, their tides eternal, their silence deep. their stories unending. The dawn of the 19th century brought with it a new age of sails and steam, a century when the oceans once again revealed themselves as both vast and intimate, both dangerous and essential. The rhythms of the sea had not changed, yet humanity's relationship with it deepened in scale and in reach. Ships became larger, voyages became longer, and science began to pay even closer attention to the waters that had shaped every era before. The Atlantic, always a restless corridor between continents, now carried more travelers than ever before. Migrations surged as millions left Europe in search of new lives across the ocean. On crowded decks, families huddled together, staring out at waves that seemed endless, their minds torn between grief for the lands they had left and hope for the lands they had yet to see. To them, the sea was not merely a space between, it was a passage of transformation, a liminal threshold between old and new. Nights at sea were long and heavy, the stars stretching overhead, their lights mirrored in the dark water below. Many wondered if the sea itself carried memory, if it knew the weight of so many dreams cast upon it. At the same time, steamships began to change the tempo of the oceans. Where once voyages depended entirely on the favor of winds, now engines churned with iron certainty. The sea, once dictating pace, was now slowly being challenged by machinery. Still, storms humbled these vessels as easily as they had humbled sails, reminding every traveler that no invention could fully erase the ocean's authority. And yet, the world grew smaller. Journeys that had once taken weeks could now be measured in days, and as steamships drew lines across the seas, global connection grew stronger than ever before. Farther east, the Indian Ocean remained what it had always been, a bridge between civilizations, but the 19th century transformed its role. European empires, tightening their grip on colonies, sent steamships and warships into waters once ruled by the seasonal monsoon winds. The dhows still sailed, their triangular sails catching breezes as they had for centuries, yet alongside them roared ships of steel and iron. Markets expanded, spices and silks still moved, but now opium, cotton, and manufactured goods altered the old balances. The Indian Ocean absorbed these new rhythms, its ports reshaped, its ancient traditions forced to adapt to industrial power. The Pacific Ocean, immense and seemingly inexhaustible, became the stage for new waves of exploration and expansion. Whaling ships set out from New England and Europe, pressing deep into waters where leviathans moved unseen. The pursuit of whales, giants of the deep, was dangerous and relentless. Men in small boats launched themselves against creatures whose size dwarfed them, and when the whale breached, the sea itself seemed to erupt. For some, the hunt was survival. For others, it was fortune. But in the stillness between battles, the Pacific showed its gentler side, sunlight glittering across endless horizons, quiet lagoons filled with life, and islanders watching from the shores, witnesses to the changing world. At the same time, scientific expeditions ventured forth to study the ocean itself. Perhaps the most famous of these was the voyage of the HMS Challenger, launched in 1872. For nearly 4 years, the ship traveled across every major ocean, lowering instruments into depths that no human had ever touched, sampling waters, collecting organisms, mapping currents. The sea, long imagined as immeasurable, began to give up its data. Charts grew more precise, and a new science, oceanography, was born. Yet even as the measurements accumulated, the immensity of the ocean remained. No matter how many samples were taken, the sea always held more. The Arctic and Antarctic, too, began to draw explorers, driven by curiosity, by science, and sometimes by dreams of glory. Men pushed into icy seas, where ships could be trapped for months, their wooden hulls groaning against the frozen grip. The polar oceans, silent and white, showed another face of the world's waters, one of extremes, of endurance, of silence deeper than any other. To stand on the deck of a ship surrounded by endless ice was to feel the ocean in its most haunting form, vast and yet hushed, stretching beyond imagination. Whaling and sealing voyages carried men farther into these frozen realms, and their journals speak of seas alive with creatures adapted to the cold, penguins clustered on icebergs, seals basking on floes, and whales moving like shadows beneath the frozen surface. These accounts reminded the world that the oceans were not just highways for human ambition, but homes for countless beings whose lives intersected with ours only in fleeting glimpses. In the Mediterranean, though smaller in scale, the sea remained as central as ever. Empires crumbled, and new nations rose along its shores, yet its waters continued to connect cultures, carrying ideas as well as goods. Steam ferries crossed its blue expanse, and tourists from northern Europe came to see its ruins and landscapes, drawn by the romantic vision of antiquity. Beneath this surface of travel and leisure, however, the Mediterranean was still what it had always been, a sea of history, where every port carried centuries of memory, where every current seemed to whisper stories of past empires. The 19th century also saw the rise of canals, human attempts to shorten the endless journeys of the seas. The Suez Canal, completed in 1869, cut through the desert and joined the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Suddenly, the passage from Europe to India and beyond no longer required rounding Africa's long coast. The oceans, though unchanged in themselves, were now linked by pathways carved by human ambition. These new connections shifted trade, politics, and culture, reminding once again that the oceans, though eternal, are always part of human history. And yet, alongside empire, industry, and science, the sea continued to inspire awe. Writers like Herman Melville and Joseph Conrad captured its moods, its calm, its violence, its mystery in words that still echo today. Artists painted storm-tossed ships and quiet harbors, while musicians found in the sea's rhythm inspiration for their compositions. The ocean was not only practical, not only a stage for human ambition, it was, and remained, a profound symbol, a mirror in which humanity could see both its strength and its fragility. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the oceans held within them centuries of change, and yet they remained fundamentally themselves. They had carried hunters and gatherers in dugout canoes, traders in galleys, explorers in caravels, migrants in crowded ships, and scientists with delicate instruments. They had absorbed empires, borne witness to slavery, watched over revolutions, and reflected the rise of industry. Through all of it, their waves continued to break, their tides to shift, their depths to hold mysteries untold. Pause here, in your imagination, and listen. The sea does not rush, it does not hurry. Its story is measured in centuries, in tides that return again and again, in currents that circle without end. To drift in this history is to be carried not only across distance, but across time itself. The oceans before us, and the oceans still around us, are both ancient and new, both familiar and unknowable. And as history moves forward, the sea remains, always present, always silent, always immense. The 20th century arrived like a tide swelling against the shore, bringing with it a rush of change that touched every corner of the world. The oceans, as always, were there to receive it. They had already seen the sails of empires, the churn of steamships, and the slow opening of science, but now they would witness both the brightest ambitions and the darkest struggles of humankind. The early years of the century were marked by movement. Steamships carried more travelers than ever before, their iron hulls slicing steadily across the Atlantic and Pacific. Migration continued, vast numbers of people leaving homelands behind to seek possibility across the seas. Journeys that had once taken months were now measured in days. The ocean seemed smaller, though it remained as immense as it had always been. On deck, travelers leaned against the rails, breathing in the salt air, watching the horizon blur between sea and sky, knowing that behind them lay one life, and ahead lay another. But the ocean, always so deeply tied to human history, soon became entangled in the violence of war. In 1914, the First World War broke out, and the seas became battlefields. The North Sea bristled with mines, the Atlantic grew perilous with submarines, and the Mediterranean trembled under the passage of fleets. For centuries, ships had fought upon the waters, but now steel and machinery transformed to scale. The submarine, slipping silently beneath the surface, revealed a new face of the ocean, hidden, unseen, and dangerous. To sail the sea in those years was to feel the invisible threat lurking beneath, waiting without sound, moving in silence. The sea absorbed these struggles without preference. Ships went down, men vanished into the depths, and the waves closed over them with calm indifference. For the families on land, the ocean became a place of loss, a grave without a marker. Yet even amid war, the sea's rhythms continued. Tides came and went, waves rose and fell, and beneath it all, the ancient creatures of the deep carried on their lives, unaware of the conflicts above. After the war ended, the oceans became highways once again. The 1920s and 1930s brought grand ocean liners, floating palaces of iron and glass that crossed the Atlantic with elegance. Passengers dined under chandeliers, promenaded on polished decks, and watched the waters stretch endlessly around them. For some, these ships were luxury. For others, they were the means of migration, carrying workers, dreamers, and exiles across borders. The ocean was both glamour and necessity, both celebration and survival. Then, once again, war returned. The Second World War spread across every ocean, from the icy reaches of the North Atlantic to the warm expanse of the Pacific. Navies clashed in battles of enormous scale. Carriers launched planes that filled the skies, and submarines prowled beneath, more deadly than ever. The oceans became pathways for supplies, for invasions, for entire strategies of global conflict. Convoys crossed under constant threat, and sailors lived with the awareness that any horizon might bring danger. The Pacific War brought the sea into focus in new ways. Vast distances became battlegrounds, islands small in size but immense in consequence. Across waters that once carried Polynesian voyagers, fleets now maneuvered, and the silence of atolls was broken by the roar of engines. The sea, once a space of myth and migration, became a stage for one of history's most devastating struggles. And yet, the ocean itself did not change. Its waves continued, its depths remained untouched, and its creatures swam beneath, their lives unfolding as though wars above were only storms of sound. For every ship sunk, for every moment of human struggle, the ocean endured, holding memories in its silence. After the war, the seas became symbols of peace and connection again. The age of commercial air travel was beginning, but ocean liners still carried passengers across continents, their journeys slower, calmer, more reflective. Meanwhile, shipping itself grew ever more essential. Cargo vessels, oil tankers, and freighters made the oceans into arteries of a global economy, moving the goods of modern life from one shore to another. Science, too, continued to deepen its gaze. Submarines designed for war were adapted for exploration, descending into depths that no human eyes had ever seen. In 1960, the Bathyscaphe Trieste carried explorers to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth, nearly 7 miles beneath the surface. They found silence, pressure, and life-fragile creatures adapted to the crushing darkness. The ocean, once thought to be lifeless at such depths, revealed that even there, in the blackest void, life endured. The 20th century also brought the oceans into human imagination in new ways. Films and literature captured their vastness, sometimes as romance, sometimes as terror. The sea became a stage for stories of survival, for tales of mystery, for metaphors of human longing and fear. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 had already etched itself into memory, a reminder that no matter how advanced the technology, the ocean remained greater. That story lingered, passed from generation to generation, each retelling reminding us of the sea's indifference to human ambition. But another story was beginning to emerge as well, the story of the sea itself as fragile, not eternal in its abundance. By mid-century, scientists and fishermen alike began to notice declines in fish populations, pollution in waters near cities, and the spreading reach of oil spills. The ocean, which had always seemed infinite, revealed its vulnerability. Its ecosystems, delicate and intricate, could be harmed by human hands. This awareness grew slowly, like a tide, until by the late century, it became clear the oceans were not merely backdrops to human history, but living systems whose well-being was bound to our own whales. Once hunted without restraint, became symbols of this shift. Once valued only for oil and bone, they came to be seen as magnificent beings, worthy of protection. Their songs, captured on recordings, reached human ears with haunting beauty, reminding listeners of the vast, unseen world beneath the waves. Campaigns to save whales became part of a broader recognition that the oceans were not only resources, but homes, ecosystems, realms of wonder that deserved care. By the close of the 20th century, satellites orbited above, tracing currents from space, watching storms form, measuring the color of plankton blooms across entire seas. Technology had given humanity new eyes, new tools, new data, but the old feelings remained as well. Sailors still stood on decks and watched the horizon. Children still listened to the roar of waves against the shore. Poets and dreamers still turned to the sea for inspiration, still heard in its rhythm something timeless. The ocean, through the wars, through the industry, through the science, remained what it had always been, a presence both immense and intimate, both eternal and ever. Its waters carried memory, its depths held secrets, and its waves continued to break in the same patient rhythm that they had followed since before the first human eyes ever gazed upon them. Imagine yourself now, adrift in that century. Picture the horizon, unchanged from the days of sail, from the days of empire, from the days of canoes cutting through lagoons. The sea is still there, still the same. It has watched over us through every chapter, and it will continue long after. Its story is larger than ours, yet ours is always written upon it. From the first whispers of creation, when the earth was young and fire met water, the oceans had been there. They have carried the weight of continents, cradled the stirrings of life, and stretched across time with a patience beyond imagination. When we look at them, when we listen to their endless rhythm, we are not just observing nature, we are touching a presence that has endured for billions of years. Every civilization that rose upon this earth has known the ocean. Some feared it, some revered it, some mastered its winds and currents, but none could ever escape it. It has been at once a barrier and a pathway, a source of food and a stage of mystery. It has shaped myths and religions, inspired poets and dreamers, and carried the vessels of explorers into unknown worlds. And yet, through all of this, the ocean itself remained unchanged. Its tides moved with the pull of the moon, its depths held their silence, its waves spoke in the same language they always have. Think of the ancient sailors, leaning into the winds as their sails filled, eyes fixed on horizons they could not yet see. Think of fishermen in small boats, rising before dawn, casting nets into waters that seemed infinite. Think of the builders of ships, their hands upon the wood or the iron, shaping vessels meant to ride upon the restless surface. Each of them lived lives bound to the sea. Each of them returned to the land with stories, and all of them, in their own way, belonged to the rhythm of the waves. Time passed, empires fell, languages changed, but the sea did not fade. It continued, as steady as the breath of the planet itself. When storms rose, they came and went. When calm settled, it was deep and endless. Beneath the surface, creatures swam unseen, carrying on ancient patterns of migration, hunting, and song. The whales moved across whole oceans, their voices echoing through the deep. The shoals of fish shimmered together like living silver. Even in the darkness of the abyss, where no sunlight reaches, strange beings endured, glowing softly in the blackness. And we, for all our science, for all our maps, still know so little. The oceans cover most of our world, and yet we have touched only the edges. We send machines into their depths, we measure their currents from satellites, but they remain vast, mysterious, unknowable in full. In a way, this is comforting. For all we have learned, the oceans remind us that there will always be more to discover, more to imagine, more to revere. Now, as we look back on the long story we have traced together, we see the ocean not just as water, but as a thread that binds humanity across ages. From the first myths told by firesides, of gods and monsters rising from the deep, to the voyages of discovery that redrew the maps of the world, to the modern awareness that these waters are fragile and in need of care, the ocean has been our companion. Sometimes kind, sometimes harsh, but always there, always present. It is not just history, it is memory. The waves that break upon the shore tonight are born of winds that circled the globe, winds that once brushed the sails of explorers, winds that once carried whispers across deserts, winds that have always moved across time. To stand by the sea, or even to imagine it now, is to be connected to everything that came before. Close your eyes and picture it, a horizon that stretches without end, where the blue of water meets the pale of sky. The surface shifts gently, rising and falling like the breath of the earth. Each wave carries a sound, soft, steady, eternal. Beneath, the currents move like invisible rivers, flowing across distances greater than continents. Far below, in the silence of the deep, life stirs quietly, unseen yet ever present. This is the same ocean that has always been, and it is the same ocean that will always be. We live for brief moments, but the sea endures. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall back into dust, yet the waters remain. The pyramids of Egypt have stood for thousands of years, but the Nile has always flowed into the same sea. The great walls, the shining cities, the towers of glass, all of them are but brief sparks when compared to the tide. The ocean has seen them come and go, as it will see us, and after, it will continue. There is peace in this thought. The ocean teaches us that we are small, but also that we are part of something vast. Each life is like a drop of rain falling into the sea, brief, unique, but becoming part of a greater whole. Just as rivers flow into oceans, so do our stories, our memories, our dreams join the greater rhythm of time. Tonight, as you listen, let the sea carry you. Imagine its waves rising and falling, steady and calm. Imagine yourself drifting upon it, weightless, safe, carried by something older and greater than anything we can name. Each breath is a tide, each thought is a ripple, each moment is part of the endless flow. The oceans before us are also the oceans within us. Our bodies carry their salt, our hearts follow their rhythm, our dreams echo their mystery. To rest now is to return to that rhythm, to let yourself drift as countless sailors, wanderers, and dreamers have drifted before. The water carries them still, and it will carry you. And so, we come to the end of this journey, though the ocean itself has no end. We leave it here, timeless, eternal, watching beneath the stars. Its surface will shimmer under the moonlight, its depths will hold their secrets, and its waves will continue to move, as they always have, as they always will. Sleep now, as the ocean sleeps, vast and endless, calm and eternal. Let the story settle within you like the tide upon the shore. The oceans remain, they will always remain.